So today's webinar is about the importance of always having access to work. I would say is kind of the main topic we're covering today. And I'll talk to you about why law firms aren't necessarily that excited about hiring attorneys that are unemployed. Now, none of this means that you can't get a position, but it means that there's going to be a lot of obstacles that are in your way if you don't have access to work. So what does that mean exactly in terms of access to work? So an attorney, like in their through your entire career, from the time you're a law student and trying to get a job until effectively that you retire, you're always supposed to have access to work, and that means people to give you things to do, that you're working. And if you're not working, then you don't have access to work. And if you quit a job or get fired from a job, you don't have access to work. So having work to do throughout your career is absolutely the most important thing. As an associate, you're supposed to have access to work and getting work. As a law student, you hopefully get a summer position. That doesn't have to be a summer associate in a law firm or someplace, having access to work. And as you become a more senior attorney, your goal is to continually have access to work, people giving you things to do. It's just fascinating. I was talking yesterday to an attorney that had spent 13 years at a large New York law firm, and then he had not made partner, and he left and went to a smaller firm, and the firm just kind of piecemeals out work to him. He's been working there for 7 or 8 years and making maybe $100,000 a year. When he was at this large firm, he was making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And he's in a position right now where his self-esteem is very low and he doesn't have access to work. He doesn't have work at his firm. They're not giving him enough things to do. And he's very scared. And this is the thing that happens. If he had built relationships and stuff earlier in his career and had people to give him things to do, he wouldn't be in this situation. And he's depressed and feels like, there's problems with his problems with him. He's having a hard time supporting his family, and he just doesn't have access to work. And with him in particular, I'm actually doing pretty well. I'm taking his resume and framing it as a trust and estates attorney, and I think I will be able to get him a lot of work to do for the rest of his career. So I can help people like this, but when you lose access to work, that's a problem. If you're a partner, you want clients giving you work. If you're an associate, you want partners in your firm and other people giving you work. And once you run out of work, effectively your practice stops. When you're young, your practice is doing work for other people and getting work. That's what your legal practice is. And as you get more senior, your job is to keep access to work. Now, people do different things to get access to work. Some people can go in-house. Some people will start their own practices. But this whole idea of having access to work is something that really should always be in the back of your mind. Your number one priority is attorney. Partners' number one priority is to get business. Associates' number one priority should be to get work from other people. And you do not want to lose access to work. When you lose access to work, all sorts of bad things happen. Like you lose your job. If you lose your job, it's much harder to find a job when you're unemployed than when you're employed. It was funny. I was reading a Wall Street Journal article a couple of days ago, and they were talking about this person that had got a degree in computer science and it got a job with a company. And then after a couple of years, decided to quit because he didn't like the company. And he has not been able to find a job as an unemployed computer science person for 2 years and is working in a sandwich shop. I talked to another, or not talked to another, but I read another story because the employment market is not good right now. A lot of people aren't able to get jobs. And then I read another story about a guy that had gotten a PhD and was trying to apply for all these jobs and no one was hiring him. So he was trying to do the same thing, apply at fast food restaurants and things like that. And even the fast food restaurants weren't hiring him. I mean, they have the option of hiring someone that's a PhD and likely to leave and unemployed, or they have the option of hiring someone that's currently working at another Burger King or whatever. And they know that that person's going to stick around and be stable. And maybe there's not problems with them. And you see a lot of fast food people that are, in their 30s and 40s, they become managers and things. And so anytime you don't have access to work, it gets very, very difficult. Law firms, by the way, I think are the number one way to keep access to work because you can learn how to generate business. There are law firms in every city and town and everywhere all over the country. There are over 100,000 of them in places that you can work, and you can always find a job. It's that people that lose their jobs or quit their jobs don't really do the type of job searches you need to do. They don't apply to as many places as they can. They're not proactive, and so they're not getting work. And if they're not getting work, there's a presumption that they're not working hard enough, not representing themselves well enough, and unable to get a position. At the outset, I wanted to just kind of tell you about a couple points that to me are quite interesting. I actually placed him, but I was working with an attorney not too long ago, like a month or two ago, and he had been a litigation attorney to like major law firms. I think the last one was Quinn Emanuel, and then he quit that job to go in-house. And when he went in-house, he lost that job after a couple of years, not through any fault of his own, but because the company merged or went out of business or something. And this is what happens a lot of times. People go into places where there's not a consistent amount of work that they can count on, and then they lose access to work, and it becomes much more difficult for them to get jobs. People have made the same mistake recently with going into the federal government. Now the federal government is cleaning house and letting people go, and they're losing access to work. And that's very difficult for them. So if you're able to stick it out with a law firm, learn some of the things that I'm going to talk to you about today, some of the reasons you shouldn't quit a job, you can have an amazing career working in a law firm. And I talk about this in most webinars because I think it's extremely important. In a law firm, you can work for a variety of partners and things who are going to give you work. You can always find a position in a law firm because there's so many of them. Some of them won't pay very well, but there's always someone that will hire you in a law firm if you do a broad enough search. You have the ability to bring in clients. So partners and things or attorneys with clients, maybe you're a solo practitioner with clients. You will have multiple clients and you will be able to do work for them. You will be able to find out things, more work that can be done for these clients. You'll be able to generate more clients. And so you'll always have work. Partners, by the way, and people that are senior associates or mid-level associates, they start thinking fairly earlier in their career, like, what do I need to do to keep access to work? Because they know that when they get more senior, it's going to be very difficult for them to stay in firms. So they start planting the seeds and trying to get clients and networking and doing all these things. And, when you do bring in business, you're going to be able to take your clients and go to other firms. Firms will work for you and all this sorts of stuff. So you have to be very aware that the most important thing for your career is having access to work. Even I remember there was a guy at the University of Virginia Law School that was Yale law professor, graduated from Yale, did incredibly well there, and then went to teach as an associate professor. And I remember how hard he tried to make tenure there. Didn't make tenure, was very upset. And, I communicated with him years later. He was still mad about it and had lost access to work. So even professors, they try to become tenured professors so they have access to work throughout their careers and they don't have to worry about, writing more papers and all this sort of stuff. They put themselves in a position where they have access to work. Partners and law firms try to generate business so they have access to work. So everything in your career. Judges, people want to become a federal judge because of their lifetime appointments. That gives them access to work. So everybody out there is trying to get access to work. People go into different practice areas because they think that they're more stable than other ones and they'll have access to work. People used to be going, a couple of years ago, everyone wanted to go in data privacy because they thought that that was a booming area with access to work. So everything that you do, access to work, think about in any city you're in, there's billboards, there's ads on buses for personal injury attorneys. Those personal injury attorneys are trying to get access to work. Personal injury law, by the way, 95% of it is just getting the client because almost everything settles. So personal injury attorneys are trying to get access to work. Trust in estates attorneys like trust in estates because you do a trust for someone, but you keep that file open for the rest of their lives and then you probate the will and stuff. So that's access to work. People become family law attorneys because people are always getting divorced and they think that that's a good source of work. So you have to think about your career in terms of having access to work. And if you lose access to work, that's a big problem. You don't want to ever be in a position where no one's giving you work, because if no one's giving you work, your career stops. And your career could stop after 10 years or 15 years. Your career could stop at any point in time if you lose access to work. Your career as an associate in a law firm, 3 and 4 law firms in a short period of time, people are going to be nervous about giving you access to work. So I want you to think about that. I want you to think about that very, very deeply, because your whole job as an attorney is to always have access to work. If you don't have access to work, that says something about you as an attorney to potential employers. You're in a real uphill battle if you're seeking a law firm position without a position, and when you're unemployed. In the largest markets with lots and lots of attorneys, those firms can always, it's just not a problem for them. They can always find people that are employed for the jobs that they have. And if the person's employed, then presumably they have access to work and people are giving them work. And there's not the question in the back of these firms' mind, is there a problem with this person? Why don't they have work? There is no rating agency. I mean, sure, you can be rated a good attorney by some super lawyers magazine or something, but the main rating agency for attorneys is whether or not people are giving you work. If you have a lot of work and you have stability in getting work, then that's a positive comment on your experience. The guy I was talking to yesterday that is, stayed at a law firm for 13 or 14 years and went into another law firm and is now only making $100,000 a year. But just keep that in mind. Someone that's in their 50s, is in a position where he doesn't have work, but he's also been in a position where he was at a large New York law firm and they gave him access to work for 13 hours before they, or 13 years. And that was good. But law firms are going to avoid, candidates that are unemployed for a lot of reasons. It makes it seem that you didn't fit in with a certain tribe. There's problems with you maybe not fitting in and you don't have the support, and you're often considered untouchable because firms will distance themselves from you when they can hire people that are employed. Now, that doesn't mean that people that are unemployed can get jobs. Of course they get jobs, but it just becomes that much harder. The longer you're unemployed, it becomes harder because it shows that you're not trying hard enough to get access to work. So if you are unemployed right now, you need to do everything you can to find a new position. You need to be open to moving. You need to be applying to firms that don't have openings. You need to be applying to firms if you want to work in other practice settings. But there's always a job for you. Someone will maybe not pay you what you want, but there are always jobs. And so you can always find a job. It's not something that, is impossible, but you need to be representing yourself in the same way you'd be representing a client. If you were representing a client as an attorney, like I represent clients, my attorneys that I represent, you would do everything in your power to get that person a result. You would talk to witnesses. If it was a criminal trial, you would talk to experts. You would do everything you can to win, and you need to do everything you can to win when you're looking for a job. And I'm going to tell you why why law firms will avoid you if you're unemployed, why it's going to make it more difficult to get into firms of the same caliber, and why the whole job search is just very, very difficult. I had a guy, this is another example I can remember. He went to Harvard Law School and he didn't get a job in a top firm when he graduated. It was kind of a middle market firm. He lost his job there after 10 or 12 months. Maybe he didn't get a good job because he didn't do well in law school or interview. I don't know what happened, but he lost his job after 10 or 12 months. And when he came to me, he had gotten a job, but the only job he could get was a very low paid job, making maybe $120,000 a year in New York, which isn't horrible, but it was doing personal injury law. And that was all he could get because a market like New York City is very, very competitive. There's a lot of applicants for openings. There's a lot of, firms have their choice of people that they can hire. So I'm going to talk to you about that today. So here are some of the reasons that, it's difficult to get a position when you're unemployed. So law firms believe that you probably were fired. So they think, why would you not be working if you're unemployed? So they won't really care a lot of times about the explanations. And regardless of your cover letter, they will look at you and think, it doesn't really matter what's going on. This person is probably unemployed for a reason. And that, I see this all the time. I had a candidate not too long ago. He'd been unemployed for like 6 months, and he did a screening interview with a firm, just, I don't know, the HR person or something. And they said, okay, we'll bring you back for a full day of interviews. And got to his first interview, and he walked into a partner's office, and the partner had his resume and said, oh, I didn't realize, you're currently unemployed. You're not going to get hired here. So, you can, you don't, we're done with these interviews. And this is just crazy, but it's what happens. And law firms will believe that if you're unemployed, there's something negative that may have happened, in your last firm. We'll assume that you're a risk. Honestly, like, people have all these awful things happen to them. They could be sexually harassed. They could, the law firm could have done, fire them even though they were doing something, and the attorney didn't like something illegal the firm was doing, or whatever, ethically suspect. But the law firms just don't care. They're not interested in these reasons most of the time. Now, things happen. Firms go out of business. Certain practice areas slow everywhere, and it can become, and they let a lot of people go. There are firms, sometimes what will happen is a law firm will have like a summer associate class, and then after that summer, the market starts to get really, really bad, and the law firm decides that they're not going to allow those people to start, or maybe, yeah, that can happen, or maybe they allow them to start, and then there's just no work to give them, so the law firm lets them go. These sorts of things, when they happen, obviously are beyond your control, but at the same time, they can hurt you. And what law firms will think if you're not working is they'll think that maybe you did something wrong, maybe you did something careless, or maybe you upset somebody. And your role as an attorney in a law firm is really to try to get along with everyone and try not to upset people. If you upset people, then inside of a law firm, then they can give work to people that aren't upsetting people. And partners can gang up on, if you upset one partner, that partner is probably friends with a lot of other partners, and that they can basically tell them that you do bad work and not to give you work. All these things can happen. So, the first reason is, why do people get fired? People can get fired about lying about their hours. Usually they don't. People can get fired by, for stealing, for expense account stuff. People can get fired when issues come up about sexual harassment, like maybe they did something wrong. People can get fired for posting inappropriate content on social media. People can get fired for things like missing critical responsibilities. I had a guy recently who was in New York, and he'd been working like 18-hour days for like a couple of weeks or something on this big transaction. And then the day before the transaction, or night, he went home at like 2:30 in the morning. There was a signing or something at 8 in the morning. He just missed it, and got in all sorts of trouble, and lost his job. Sometimes, people can get fired for sharing things. These are not, main ones, but I've seen people. I saw a patent litigation attorney in the Bay Area that was patent litigation in a law firm, and then said he needed every Thursday and Friday off to take his his wife to the doctor, and was actually working at Cisco, where he'd been working for 8 or 9 years. When people do stuff like that and get caught, but if law firms are nervous that you may have done something bad, and they just don't know if you're unemployed. A lot of times, the reason that people are let go, and this is I don't think that most people watching this, if not the majority of them, have done something that negative. But one of the biggest reasons that people lose their jobs is, they may overlook details, or they'll make mistakes that just can be serious, or even not serious, or just not turning in work that's at the expectation of, the firm. And people that don't do good work or make a lot of mistakes and stuff are let go, even if they're partners many times. People are complaining. Top law firms and most law firms expect you to produce a work of a certain quality. People don't do this all the time. I had a guy that not too long ago he was in a firm in Delaware, like a big one, like Richards Layton, I think, and he failed the bar exam twice. And so he moved from Delaware back to where he was from, like the suburbs of Washington, DC. And I was able to get him a job with a solo practitioner. And before he started, I said, you need to do everything you possibly can to produce the best quality work for him, to work hard. And, you pass the bar, and you need to give it everything you got. And this guy started turning in, work that wasn't good and upsetting his partner and with a lack of enthusiasm. And so he was a big risk, and the law firm, had to let him go. So, firms don't want to risk keeping around weak performers. They assume if you're not employed many times that you might be a poor performer. They don't know. And there's no rating agency for attorneys. Like I said earlier, the only thing they have to evaluate is your resume, your employment stability, and so forth. So many firms will assume that your work wasn't good or your attitude was bad. Your job working in any law firm is to be able to get work. If you're someone that doesn't have business, your job is to be able to get work from other attorneys. So you have to go to other attorneys and you have to do good work for them, and you have to get repeat business. And then you have to be solicitous of going out and finding work from other attorneys. You have to ask them for work. You have to network with other partners and things to get work. You have to find out who has work and who doesn't have work and get work for them. So, the best attorneys and associates in law firms will try to get close to the partners that have the most work so they can get more and more work. So it's a competition in law firms. So some law firms have so much work, they're just giving it to everybody. But even if they're doing that, there are people that don't get work. When I was at Quinn Emanuel, for example, there were, I don't know, 6 or 7, maybe 10 people in my starting class. And there were people that were billing 3,000 hours a year, and people were giving them lots of work. And there were people that were sitting there billing 1,000 hours a year that weren't getting work. They weren't seeking out work. They weren't impressing the people they were getting work from, all these sorts of things. So you have to be able to get work from other attorneys. When you get more senior, your job is to get work from clients, hopefully, or to be close to partners that have a lot of work and to get work from them. That's your job. You have to get repeat business, and you have to have people always giving you access to work. And law firms will presume that a lot of times that attorneys that are unemployed are let go because of the hours. Maybe their hours are low because there's not a need for them to, they're not doing good work. And it makes it harder with that assumption to get jobs elsewhere. There's another point too I want to explain real briefly, and this is very important. When you're an attorney, your job is actually to create work. So what does that mean? So any partner that has clients will figure out things that they can do to get to do work for those clients. If they have a client that pays a lot of money, they may have associates just write all sorts of memos and things. They're creating work for that associate to get the billing, the billings to the client higher. They're going out and they're finding new clients that need a certain type of work. They meet the client and they tell the client all of a sudden, you need to do these sorts of things, and you need to do these documents, and you should file this lawsuit, or you should do this, or you do that. And so lawyers have to be able to create work. I'm creating work. Like, I didn't just come up with this PowerPoint, because for whatever reason, I don't have to do these webinars each week, but I create work for myself. And so that's what you should be doing as an attorney. You need to figure out how to create work. If you're a solo practitioner, you need to figure out how to create work. If personal injury attorney is going to advertise on buses, you're creating work wherever you can go, so you have things to do. So you need to create work, and you hopefully can create work from other attorneys in your firm. If you're an associate or whatever your role is, if you want to be a summer associate or work in the summer someplace, you're putting yourself in a position where you're creating work, and you need to be able to create work. And how do you do that? I mean, you're supposed to generate work. You're supposed to network with partners and other colleagues. You're supposed to do good work for the people that you work for. And the attorneys who, get the most assignments are the ones that are doing a good job and getting repeat work. If you're, anytime law firms let people go during recessions or when they lose clients, they don't let everybody go. They usually let some people go. And the people they let go are often, they make it based on hours. And there's a presumption if your hours are low, then you're not doing a good job creating work. If you're not doing a good job creating work in your current firm, then you probably won't do a good job with clients creating work. So you have to think about ways you can create work. You ask people when you get an assignment, are there other things that I can do that will for you? Are there other things that you need? And you solicit like ideas and work and so forth. And so if you don't get enough work, then that's a problem. There was a associate that I worked with a while ago, and he was in New York, and it was a big firm, and I think he was in investment management or something. I don't remember what the practice area was, but every Monday at 8 a.m. there was a partner in Boston that would email a list of work that they needed done, and then they would expect the associates to be in the office at 8, and then respond that they wanted to take this work. And so the first people to respond, I mean, they literally, this is how they did it, would get the assignments. And so this guy said, I'm not going to come in at 8 to get work. I'm there to they can give me work, but I'm not going to come in 2 hours earlier than I usually do. And so his hours were low, and he lost the job, and he couldn't get another job in a big firm. So when you have work, it shows that you can get work from other attorneys. It shows that if you're in the market, like if you become a partner, you're probably going to be able to get work. It shows that you're doing quality work and people are giving you more things to do. It proves that you're getting repeat business from people inside your law firm. And if you can't get work from other attorneys, firms will assume that there may be something wrong with the quality of your work. They may assume they're unable to network and find work from other attorneys in the firm, which makes you profitable. So being able to get as much work as you can is important, and being able to develop internal relationships that are strong when you're working for other people, where they're likely to give you work, is also important. When you get senior, if you're not generating business, you don't have that potential, then you don't have work. And at this level, you're supposed to generate work. People make partner in major law firms all the time, and they typically, when a law firm makes a partner for someone without business, they will often make that person a partner, because that person's been able to generate a lot of hours and repeat business from partners in the firm and all the sorts of stuff. But when they make them partner, then they're like, okay, this is over, us giving you work. Now you have to be able to go out into the market, and you have to be able to generate work. And if you're unable to do that, if you're unable to go out on the market and generate work, then that's a sign to the firm that that you can't generate work on your own, and you're let go. And this is sad. This happens to people that make partner in law firms all the time. And when it happens, like their whole lives kind of go off the rails. You're like, what am I going to do? Like, if I can't find a position and no one's giving me work, what can I do? Can I go in house? Can I do all this? And many times those careers end up stalling, and people will basically their careers will stop, even though they were able to make partner in a major law firm. They're unable to keep going because this stuff happens. So if you're senior, then it shows and you don't have work, and it shows that you don't have the ability to generate and keep clients, and that's a problem. So there are law firms that will hire partners to work in there that don't necessarily have books of business, and they're maybe very talented in some practice area, and the law firm needs them. I've placed a lot of people like that this year. I placed an antitrust attorney from a big New York law firm and another law firm that needed someone with expertise in that. And so you can still get jobs, but that particular person had been at the same firm for 15 years and was a non-equity partner, and wanted to go someplace where the billing rates were lower, and he thought he could generate work, and the firm needed someone with his expertise. So the thing is that people want people that can sustain themselves through work and are getting work from other people. Lots of times when people leave firms, it's very common. They may have had attitude problems. They may have been unhappy with their superiors. They may call it toxic. They may not like all the work. They may not like the type of work they're doing. They may not like their peers. This sort of dissatisfaction, even though it's completely justified for you to have it, it can hurt things. Like, it can hurt if you're not enthusiastic about the cases and the work you're doing, then that shows. If you're not happy with the firm and you make that shows. And it can result in all sorts of problems. You're not going to be as excited for working on clients. You may not be doing the best work. And so law firms will often presume that you may have had a attitude problem. And people want to hire people and have people around who are pleasant and make them feel good about themselves and don't have negativity. And if law firms think you have a negative attitude, then who are they going to keep around? Are they going to give work to people that have a good attitude, or are they going to and work with them, or are they going to give work to people that have a negative attitude? And unfortunately, in a law firm, you're expected to work with lots of different types of people. And just like a lawyer would have all sorts of different types of clients, you're expected to work with all sorts of different types of people and make them happy. And if you don't, they presume you may not, think you may have an attitude problem, and they won't like that. I spoke earlier just about the fact that when a law firm lets people go, they rarely let everyone go. They release people that they think are the least valuable. And you could be the least valuable because your hours aren't good enough. You could be the least valuable because of your skills. You might even do really good work and have really good hours, but a poor attitude, or you're unable to network with other attorneys in the firm and get work. And so, this just makes these are presumptions that people reach, and another law firm doesn't want to hire someone who's undesirable or might have been undesirable. They want people that the law firm thinks are valuable enough to keep. Now, all the stuff I'm saying is not necessarily positive. It's not something that should make you feel good. And I'm just helping you realize these things, because even if you're unemployed, you need to realize the importance in your next job of hopefully keeping it and showing some stability, and like people were giving you a lot of work before you leave. Law firms, when they interview people, they don't do it all the time. They do it probably 50% of the time, or maybe a little bit less than that, but they'll ask you, what your hours have been like. And if you have really high hours, then that sounds very good to the firm. They like that, because that means other people are giving you work. Some places you may not be a cultural fit. And this is something many times that you can't control. There are law firms with different cultures, different, fraternities have different cultures, different companies have different cultures, different schools and universities have different cultures, and law firms have their own cultures. And these cultures will determine, you have to find a place where you'll fit in. I mean, there are firms where they're extremely social and everyone's going out drinking, every week. And there are firms that are the exact opposite. And you have to be in a firm, if you can, that has a culture that matches the way you are. Different parts of the country have different cultures in the law firms. And if you don't fit in with that culture, then the law firm will often get rid of you. I was working with a woman early in my career, and she was at a big international law firm in Silicon Valley. And one day someone just walked into her office and let her go and just said, you're not a good cultural fit. So law firms will pick up on that, and that can, hurt you. So you need to try to fit in with the culture of where you are. And, it's not to say you can. If you're in a law firm where the culture doesn't match you, then you certainly can, find another job. But you are expected to do your best to fit in, with cultures. And so, every law firm calls the partners partners. I mean, they're partners. That means, they'll share work together. They'll often have the same type of speech and mannerisms, and and so you have to try to fit in with a culture wherever you go, and you have to literally be, I would say, to some extent, chameleon. And it's unfortunate that it works that way, but that's just how it does. Sometimes people aren't good fits for working in law firms, and that's okay. If you hire someone from Yale Law School that's done, is very interested in, public interest and stuff, and is very academic, and, may not be a good fit for a law firm, and law firms can pick up on that. And so, sometimes, you're not, you're just not a fit. And there's nothing wrong with not being a fit for law firms in general. But, if you're let go, then law firms will presume them. Certain personalities can struggle. Some people that are extremely social and don't want to sit in an office all day can often struggle. Certain people that are more interested in entrepreneurial pursuits will struggle. I was in, even when I was a summer associate, I was more interested in entrepreneurial activities and all the things I could do. And I was like, I can make more money working as a contractor than I can make working in a law firm. And I was more interested in that. I talked about it. And, sometimes people will have so many outside interests that they're not really compatible with working in a law firm. That's okay. There's just people that don't belong there. And I would say you can't reach a conclusion that you don't belong in a law firm until after several years in a law firm. I mean, maybe you can reach that conclusion right away, like I sort of did. But, sometimes you have to just realize that when you're a young attorney, you're expected to work all these hours, you're learning things, your work's getting criticized. You may not like the law firm for that reason, but you're expected to, fit into that in a relatively short period of time. Most law firms, if you leave them, will assume that you didn't leave voluntarily. Most attorneys have lots of expenses. They have rent to pay. They rent someplace. They have student loans. If they're in a city, they have cars. They may have a house. They may have a family to support. So people assume, like, why would you leave someplace without any income? Why would you do that unless you were fired? And so, most attorneys, not all of them, but will have fairly significant financial obligations, which is rent, student loans, and family and personal responsibilities. And so people assume, why would you walk away from that? If you were, why would you do that? I mean, they just don't think you would. So, if you do walk away from that, law firms may think, that you are independently wealthy even. So, I mean, this isn't the most common thing, I think, but they may think that. And a rich attorney or someone with a lot of, personal resources probably won't stay in a law firm very long. It's pretty rare, actually, that someone that's independently wealthy, well, why would you sit there and work really, really hard in a law firm when you don't need to? I mean, and work all weekend and things. So the law firms presume, if you're not working, reach, that sort of, they reach that sort of conclusion sometimes, and that's not something that they want. You have to, if you're interested in riding horses and golf and all these things, and you have the time, then your time in a law firm is probably going to be temporary. And and that's it. So your identities and law firm is really, in most law firms, not all, but the majority of your identities is going to be about practicing law. And it should be one of the most important things that you think about. Is equally important, or if not a little bit less, than your family, your personal relationships and that sort of thing. And so law firms will think this, and so they may believe that there's something wrong. So again, I talked about earlier, that law firms will often presume that, if you're not working, that you might have been fired, and, and that, that could be a reason. Most law firms, will give people they won't immediately terminate them and ask them to leave. They'll give them some time to look for a job. They'll allow them to stay on their website for a period of time. They will, help them so the attorney doesn't end up with a bad reputation and image and has a hard time finding a job. So most attorneys, not all, and again, you may be in a situation where that is not the case, but most attorneys are given a window, some time to find another job. And different firms will give them, different lengths of time that, in the worst cases, the law firm may ask them to leave immediately. Sometimes, smaller mid-sized firms will do that. They're not as concerned about the reputation as larger firms. But here's kind of, how it works. If the firm likes you and you've worked there a lot of times, they'll tell you you won't make partner and just start looking for a job. They may not even give you a time frame to do it. You may have a year. You just don't know. But usually, some will allow you to stay indefinitely and may even change if your performance improves. Most won't. Sometimes firms will give you 6 months to a year, and they'll say we'll revisit in 6 months, and we'll do that. Sometimes a law firm will basically not be able to afford you, or just not have enough work, or they may be unhappy with you, or they'll give you 3 to 6 months. Sometimes they'll give you a month. It just depends. Most prestigious firms, like the best firms, will give people a fair amount of time to protect their brand, and they'll allow you to stay on the website. They're doing that because they don't want to hurt your reputation. They don't want to get a reputation for letting a lot of people go. They want to think that maybe you'll become in-house counsel someplace and give them business. And they want to protect the morale and security of other attorneys, because if they're fired just kind of without, instantly, then that scares other attorneys that could happen. So most, The very, very top firms like in New York, for example, will rarely let attorneys go, even in recessions. Their stability, that their reputation is very, very important to them. Now, there are not a lot of firms like this, but there's firms that never let people go. But, being let go from a prestigious firm raises questions if you're unemployed, because you should be able to get a job during your transition period. If you didn't get a job and you weren't looking at enough smaller to mid-sized firms, talking to enough recruiters, then there's a doubt that maybe you didn't work hard enough to get a job, or maybe you didn't want to get a job, or maybe firms that were interviewing you saw something wrong with your background. So if you are from a major US law firm and unemployed, then there'll be a lot of questions about why you didn't get a job sooner. I was working with a guy recently. He was in Texas, and he'd gone to a really good school, like at Columbia or NYU or something, and had done very well there, and then had gotten a job with a major law firm, and then gotten another job with a major law firm, and then he'd been unemployed for like 6 to 8 months, and I couldn't figure it out, why he was unemployed for so long. But I started getting him interviews, and then I would do interview prep calls with him. And the last interview prep call I did with him, he showed up. It was like 3 in the afternoon his time, and I could tell he was drunk. So there were problems with him that probably the reason he wasn't at these firms. And so most prestigious firms will give people time to find a job. If you're at a really good firm or a middle market firm and they're giving you time to find a job, you need to move very, very quickly and apply to as many places as you possibly can. And if you're not, then that raises questions. So most prestigious firms will give you 3 to 6 months, or allow you to use your voicemail even if they're not paying you, or they let you go right away. Or law firms will always. So if I submit a candidate to a law firm, that law firm will always check to see if they're on the website and so forth. And if they don't, they come back with questions. Law firms, will often just let people go, and to increase the profits per partner and have people, there's just all sorts of firms that do things differently, even with a few weeks notice. But most law firms will give you some time, and you need to move quickly. If you think you're going to lose your job or be laid off, you should be looking for and applying to jobs. There is nothing wrong with going out and interviewing with a law firm. If you're currently, if you think you're going to lose your job or things are unstable, you should be doing everything you can to be aware of the market. As a matter of fact, you should be understanding like what the opportunities are in the market at all times. Like you should be monitoring LinkedIn, you should be monitoring Indeed. You should be looking at your local bar association website and seeing what's out there. You should be Law Crossing is my site. It's also very good because it looks at law firm websites for jobs that aren't advertised in in-house places. And so you should always be aware of where you're marketable and what the market's like. And if there's any sign of danger and things are bad or happening in your law firm, then you need to be applying to places and networking and going out and interviewing, because you may need to take another job. And if you interview someplace, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And it should be something that you're doing. People that want to work in-house that are in big law firms will often will look for in-house jobs for 2 or 3 years, and they'll keep working where they're at, but they want that option. They want to go in-house for whatever reason. I don't think it's the best decision, but they'll always be monitoring the market, and you need to do the same thing too. A lot of prestigious firms won't care about the brand or attorney morale that much. But the less the prestigious firm you get a job with, the more difficult, the more if the firm lays you off, the less notice you may have, and it may be more difficult. So there are reasons to go to work in the best firms many times. But if you go to work at some firm that's a spinoff of a large firm or some middle market firm or something, they can often, or a small firm, they may just let you go because they're not as concerned about these things. So lots of law firms may give you no notice. Other law firms, the less prestigious the law firm is, the less likely to give you notice. Also, if you're in a really small law firm, you might be working for just one person, and that person, can let you go, doesn't care. So, my biggest piece of advice is that when you do lose a job, or you think you're going to lose a job, you need to do everything you can to find a position, and you cannot be choosy. So people will get offers and say, oh, it pays less than my current job or my last job. And that doesn't matter. You have to look at your resume as someone that always have access to work. When there's these gaps, it can hurt you. It can hurt you not just now, but in the future. And you can say, oh, I had some family issues where I took time off and stuff. But most of the time, even when people do leave for those sorts of reasons, law firms are very suspect when they're interviewing them because, again, they have the option of hiring people where there aren't those suspicions compared to people that are. And firms expect you to be able to get work. So you lose a job or you're losing a job, firms expect you to get work and have work to do. That's just how they like to look at your resume. You do not need to work in your existing market if you can't find a job. You can look at smaller jobs where there are smaller markets where there's more demand for attorneys with your skills. You can look all over the country. There's, you can look at BCG has a chart with bar reciprocity. You can wave into all sorts of places. So you can apply to firms all over the country. There are, right now I've been working with some patent attorneys that are in Florida, and there is not a lot of patent work in Florida. I think they moved there during COVID or something. I don't know the exact reason that all these patent attorneys are in Florida, but almost all of them are working, they're working remotely, but, patent law is a federal practice area. And if you're admitted to the Patent and Trademark Office, you're practicing federal law. It doesn't necessarily matter where you're at. And I think some firms have to have people barred in the state. I don't know exactly how it works, but there are all these attorneys, like I'm just encountering them all the time, every week. And they get jobs in Texas and Utah and all these different places working remotely. And so they're able to find work. And so sometimes you have to expand your search to other markets. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. Why wouldn't you? You want to keep access to work, you want to have your expenses paid, and you want to keep learning. And so if you're unemployed, firms will often presume you were not given a lot of time to leave. And little time usually means that the law firm may not have liked you or whatever. It's just the assumption that you did something wrong. I was working with a partner not too long ago, and he was in Colorado, and he was at, Am Law 100, like big, really good law firm. And that partner was losing his job, I think because the retirement age was 65, and he needed to keep working. And I was able to find him a position in San Antonio, Texas, at a firm that did the exact type of patent law he was an expert in. And they were both just thrilled to have meeting each other. And so he moved from Denver to San Antonio, and he'd never even been to Texas. He was 65 years old. He'd never even been to Texas, but he was able to kind of go all out in the search and let me help him. And so he stayed employed. So presumption you might have angered someone, all these sorts of things. And there's the other thing too, that attorneys that are unemployed, there's a presumption that they may be hard to manage. So anytime you're working for a law firm, whether it's as an associate or a partner or even a summer associate, like they have to see that you're manageable. Just to get this right off, to make you understand how manageable you need to be throughout your career, partners are manageable. Partners have to be told the compensation they're going to receive. Partners are reviewed by executive committees for things like how active they are in the community, their hours, how many hours they gave to an associate, what their billing rates are, if they've been able to raise their billing rates. So partners are actually more managed in law firms than even associates, but people need to be manageable. And manageable means that they're going to follow directions, they're not going to question authority, they're going to act as employees and not equals to the people they're working for, which, it's interesting too. I remember watching John Quinn, talk to a client not too long ago, more than a decade ago, but I watched this and he was saying, yes, sir, and I'll do it right away, sir, like all these sorts of things. So even partners that are worth $100 million or whatever, I mean, sure, it's worth something like that or maybe more, they're still, they still are deferential to clients and manageable to some extent. I mean, I don't know that's the best example, but you have to be manageable. You have to do what other people want. When I was at, two firms where there were summer associates, and the summer associates that didn't get offers were always people that, acted inappropriately, weren't people that looked like they were manageable. They made fun of things and stuff. And because they weren't manageable, they didn't get offers. And manageable just means when you're at a place, you have to do what people want you to do. Partners need to do what the firm wants them to do. Associates need to do what what superiors are telling them to do. I knew a guy that was, I think I've told this story before, but I was at this New York law firm, and there was a guy that had come over from Lateral and then had worked at this New York law firm for like 10 years. He was like a 12th year associate. He was told that the previous year that he'd be making partner that year. And then this other firm came over with all these, partners with a lot of business and their associates and things. And so when it came time to make partners, like they didn't make him a partner. And he was very upset. And he found this out on a Friday. And then he walked into the office on Monday, and one of the partner that had the power that made everyone business, that made everyone partner from the new firm. The partner walked into his office and basically said, "I want you to do this assignment." And it was a sort of assignment that they would give a first year associate to. And this guy was a very sophisticated real estate attorney, really high level real estate attorney. And so they, he knew the partner was kind of messing with him, and for whatever reason. And he said, "I can't do this. I'm not going to play this game right now. I'm not going to do this assignment." And the partner said, "Okay." And then walked into his office like a hour later and said, "You have two options. One, you can take this severance check and, and sign this agreement that you won't sue us and leave now, or you can just walk out the door and be fired." And literally, like, someone at that level was fired because they were told that they basically said they wouldn't do an assignment. I had another case of a woman that was at an international law firm in San Francisco, and she was told she was doing a good job and everything, and and she got to her 10th year or 8th year, and they were evaluating her to be a partner. And even though she thought she'd be doing a good job, they said, "Well, 2 years ago you turned down this assignment, and we know that you didn't work like more than 40 hours that week. You could have done it." And so just all this stuff about being manageable and doing what people want you to do. And so a lot of people will say that they're not getting the work that they want, and so they're not doing it, or they're not, they're given work outside their practice area, things they don't want to do. And you have to do what the law firm wants you to do. Law firms are profit centers. They're going to give work to whoever they need to do it, and you have to look at every assignment you get as a privilege. It's a privilege to have work to do. You have work to do, you're learning about things, you're staying active, you're keeping your hours up. And so I've heard people do all sorts of things. Like, I told an example last week of someone that went to a firm and wanted to do white collar work and was told they would give some, and then the law firm didn't have enough of it, and so they gave the person commercial litigation, and then the person refused to do commercial litigation, said, "I'm here to do white collar work," and got fired and ended up becoming a contract attorney. Their career was never the same. People will be unhappy about the work that they're getting, and they'll make that known. And that's people that are unmanageable. So if there's work, you need to do it. It doesn't matter if you're asked to do something. You have to do the work in the way the firm wants you to do it. That's your job. You have to be able to just do whatever you're asked to do. And if you're not doing the work, then you're not a team player, then you're not manageable. Some people will quit jobs because they're not getting the work that they want. And I'm sorry, but if you're a partner in a law firm and you're getting work from a client, even if you may not want to do it, you still have to do it. And when you're an associate or whatever in a law firm, if you're given work, I mean, you still have to do it. I had another guy that was very interesting. He was in Washington, D.C. He'd gone to the University of Chicago Law School and got some award for like being in the top 5 students or 10 students in his class, some sort of thing that they, award that they give you when you graduate. I don't even know what it's called. And was working for a office of a New York-based law firm in Washington, D.C. And this young partner had brought in a client. They were very excited about it. And he did something like, he asked him to go out and spend a month researching some issue. And then the associate came back and said, it's not, I don't need to spend a month on it. I know the answer. This is the answer. Like, it's unethical for you to ask me to work on it some more. And then he ended up losing his job after working for only 6 months. And I got him some interviews. I got him an offer at a really good firm, but he was conflicted out. And no other recruiter in Washington, D.C. would work with him because they didn't have any openings for attorneys with 6 months of experience. I got him out to firms that were interested in him, even though he didn't have more than 6 months of experience. But then when the one firm he got an offer through, he didn't get clear conflicts. He just kind of dropped out. He said, I'm quitting, like I'm, incredibly upset. I feel like I'm not going to be a success like my father. And then I saw his resume like 8 or 9 years later, he resubmitted to BCG. And he was at that point, working as his own practice doing criminal law, like DUIs and things. And, so just if you're not manageable, it can create all sorts of issues that can hurt you. So you need to be able to do what people want, the way they want it. I've had attorneys that have gotten offers from law firms. I had another guy that was working in, I don't know, someplace like just outside of San Francisco. He was a real estate attorney and he was making $200,000 a year. He was senior. He was like 12 or 14 years out. And he got this great offer from this firm that was about an hour from his house, paying $400,000 a year, which is just awesome, right? So you get this incredible offer. And then he came back and said, this is a really long drive. Can I work remotely 2 days a week? And they said they took away his offer and they said, that this, you should have asked when you were here if everyone here works in the office, you should have known that and pulled his offer. So these things that make you look unmanageable. I had another guy just a couple weeks ago that was a trust and estates attorney. He had his own practice. He'd never worked in a law firm. He was like 8 or 10 years out doing trust and estates law. And a law firm made him an offer for like 160,000 or 165. And he came back and was like, you need to negotiate it. You need to get more answers about, how much work I'd be entitled to do. You need to try to get me a little more money, like maybe 180. And I told him this isn't a good idea. And he said, well, this is what I want and so forth. So I went back to the firm and I tried to negotiate it for him. And they wanted someone there that would follow directions. And I'd worked very hard with this guy. And the firm just came and said, like they called him up and first of all, they withdrew the offer. Then they called him up and said, you have all these things, wrong with your background. You never worked in a law firm and stuff. And that's, you have a lot that's not going for you. You don't speak Spanish. We need someone that speaks Spanish. And they pulled the offer. I mean, he just looked like, he was going to be difficult to manage. So, people quit for work preferences. People, may not be manageable, and law firms need people that they can manage and that are going to do the things they want. They want you to be in an office a certain number of days a week that's partly remote. If you say you're not going to do that or you raise questions about it, that means you're not manageable. And so law firms, candidates will often quit law firms saying that the law firm was toxic. And, all law firms to some extent are toxic. They're composed of people that may not be nice. They're composed of all different types of people. And so, this is how it works. People will come to me and they will have worked at like a top, firm, or they'll be working there and the firm maybe is 150 years old. And they'll come and they'll say, this firm is toxic, like I had to leave. Well, that firm has probably, if it's been around 150 years, it's probably going to be around, hopefully a long period of time as well. And that law firm, you can't just go and say like a major US law firm with 1,000 attorneys is toxic. I mean, you have to be able to get along in an environment where there's going to be rude people and rude partners, and it's going to be high pressure. There's going to be often unreasonable demands. And how do you deal with that? Well, sometimes we had a question last week in the webinar. It's a pretty good question. Someone asked, I'm working for this toxic partner in this big law firm. Like, what do I do? And what you do is you try to find work from people that aren't toxic. If you are an attorney and you have a toxic client, you can fire that client, surely, but you get work from other people or other clients. And so, practicing law is difficult. I mean, the clients are never always happy. If you're a litigator, for God's sake. So if you're a litigator, your boss is a person giving you work. They may be hard on you. The client is also getting work. They may be hard on you. The judge in a case may be hard on you. So this is difficult, and it's not an easy job, and certain people can do it and other people can't, but you're expected to endure this toxicity and be able to come out on the other side. And you can't quit. You have to find another job. And people will say their firm is poorly run, and many firms are poorly run. Lawyers are not business people. They're that's not their skill. Their skill is practicing law. Now, some people are, but if you believe your firm's poorly run, it's not a reason to quit. And you can't. Every law firm's going to have different management flaws, and law firms that merge often go through long periods of time where things are poorly managed. And sometimes people go into interviews and they'll literally say they were fired because of poor management, and that's crazy, because you have to be able to adopt wherever you go. And many attorneys will quit because there's not enough work, and that can be devastating. That you could be in an office of a firm and just getting a few hours of work per day, but you're expected to sit there, and that can be scary. So if you're in that position, you need to go out and find a job, or you need to ask for different assignments you can do for the firm. Sometimes people in that situation will ask if there's articles or newsletters they can do for the firm, or research that they can do for clients that may not pay them. They find things to do and to add value, and certain people don't. So you have to figure out, how can I add value even if the firm doesn't have enough work? I mean, you just do whatever you can, and you're expected to find work from other attorneys in the firm. It's just, if there's not enough work, then it can often signal weakness. Now, that, by the way, like if you're looking for a job in unemployed, saying that there's not enough work there, that the firm lost some clients and things, is a good reason for looking for a job. And it's also not a bad reason to say when you're unemployed. So if you're unemployed, you don't talk about management, you don't talk about any problems that you had, or anything. You just basically, if you say there's not enough work, that can often be a good reason. It's one of the best in the face if there's not any. But if there wasn't enough work, then you should have been looking for a job while there was not enough work. And then the second you're fired, you should go all out. You should be applying to every job you can in your city. You should be proactively trying to network. You should be applying to work in other markets. I mean, you can't mess around. The more time you have on your resume that you're unemployed, the more difficult it is. So every month that goes by, you're increasing how difficult it is for you to get work. If work's slow, you figure out what to do. You take on internal projects. You ask attorneys if there's research you can do that maybe the client, for one of their clients, that the client's not necessarily going to pay for. You ask for internal projects. Maybe you write articles that you submit to publications and list where you're working. So, if you leave because there's not enough work, it looks like you've given up, and that's not good. Sometimes people will quit because there's too much work, and that's also not a good reason. But there are law firms. I talk to people all the time, and they're like, "This is just inhumane. Like I'm working like 7 days a week, and it's very, very stressful, and I don't have time for my family." But those attorneys don't quit. Like the smart ones, like, will look for a job. I've got a guy right now in New York, and he's a real estate attorney, and he's been working like 7 days a week for like the past 2 or 3 years, and just having any time for his family. And so he's looking for a job, but he's not quitting. I found him a job that pays maybe 2/3 of what he's making, better hours. And so, he's going to do that, but he's not quitting, because if he quit, that would be a bad thing, even though he's got too much work. So, if a law firm has a lot of work, it feels good about things. It's prosperity. It means the partners are making money. It means that there's no reason for them to let you go. It means that the firm's probably doing something right. And law firms want to have work. That's how they survive. A lot of times people will think, oh, I'm working these crazy hours at this big firm, and I want to go to like a boutique that has less work. And I was talking to a woman, very intelligent, it was very kind of a good conversation, and she was telling me about a friend of hers that had gone to Yale Law School and worked at this huge firm, and then took a job in a boutique firm, like a very really good attorneys there, because he thought the hours were going to be less. And the law firm started bringing in like these big matters, and they needed long hours. I mean, if a law firm has a big case, it doesn't mean that you can suddenly work less hours. But the client's going to need a lot of work, and the firm's going to need people to do it. And so you often can't escape long hours in a law firm. Now, there are different practice areas like tax, trust and estates, some other ones where you actually can have a relatively good hours. Other firms that do certain practice areas like that, where you can have relatively good hours. There are different geographic markets where the hours are very normal. I was talking to a woman, I placed a woman a couple weeks ago, and I think she was like insurance coverage, which is kind of an interesting practice area. It tends to have a lot of stability in it. And she was doing insurance coverage at a giant, the New York office of a big international law firm. But they were, I think the firm's based in Miami or something. And so she was doing all this work there. And so she wanted to go to a firm where she could lower billing rates and where she would have better hours. And she ended up getting a job with this law firm that was opening an office. They were from upstate New York, and they were literally like, everyone here goes home at 5. This is our culture. And so you can go to firms a lot of times where people don't work that hard, but that woman, like most people in her situation, or not like most people's situation, but she was very smart. She didn't quit because she found a firm that would match what she wanted to. But if you complain there's too much work, law firms aren't going to like that. And sometimes people will quit law firms because they feel like they had too much responsibility. That's not good. I mean, if you're getting a responsibility, that's a good thing, and you need to like step up and do it. I had another guy, one guy quit. He was a graduate. I think he was the top of his law school at UCLA, and he was working at a big firm, and he wasn't doing well there. He wasn't doing well, I think, because he was very like flamboyant and gay, like in terms of his mannerisms and the way he spoke and stuff. But he was a very nice guy. He was actually Muslim, and not only had his family like ostracize him, but I mean, he was just having all these problems. And so he was at a firm where he felt like his way of acting and being was welcome there. And so I got him this job at this firm, and it was a good firm, like a kind of a middle market firm, or it's a firm, no, it's a firm like 25 people in LA. And he got there, and they literally started like handing him, going to court, arguing these important motions, like going to trial in small cases and things. And he just couldn't handle it. And, he didn't like all the responsibility. So, you're expected to be able to do that. You're expected to want a lot of responsibility. And so you just you do it, and this is not a good reason to look. A lot of times, if you haven't been working, like I said earlier, like the longer that you're not working in a law firm, the more difficult it's going to be for you to find another position. So sometimes people will hold out for the perfect job and won't take offers, or they just won't be looking hard enough. So again, like I keep telling you, if you lose a job or you think you're going to lose a job, you need to do like an all-out search. An all-out search doesn't mean you apply to 20 jobs in 1 week and wait to see what happens, because you're obviously going to be competing with people that are employed. So getting those 20 jobs is going to be difficult. You need to apply to every firm you can find that does your practice area in every market you can conceivably work. And then you need to network and do unsolicited applications to a lot of places. If you do that, you will get a job. That's what I do with my candidates, and the ones that follow my advice always get jobs, because law firms are businesses. If someone comes along that they have enough work to give that person, like say if the law firm bills out you bill out at 500 hours a year, and they know they have 1,800 hours worth of work. That's $900,000 in revenue that the law firm's going to bring in. And if they're paying you $200,000 a year, that's an extra $700,000 profit. So even if they don't have an opening, if they have the work, they will hire you. And this is how almost all BCG candidates get jobs. Almost all of them get positions by applying to firms that don't have openings, and you should be doing the same. The longer you're unemployed, every passing week, it becomes harder and harder to get hired. The law firm assumes that you're going out on interviews and not doing well, or you're not representing yourself effectively enough to get another job. And so that can hurt. So you need to be careful about that and think about that. You have to be very, very hungry to get a new job. And sometimes firms just don't know why it's not happening. And the longer you're out, the more questions are raised. So it's not to say that you won't get hired, because you could be the best applicant for a position and they'll overlook it. But it does hurt you the longer you're unemployed. So you have to be doing everything you possibly can to get a new position when you're unemployed. And the longer the gap is, the worse the situation. They assume that there's some reason that you're not getting a job, and the longer you're unemployed, the more untouchable you are in the market. I talked earlier in the webinar about people that are looking for jobs in
fast food restaurants and all this sorts of stuff. And when a fast food restaurant has an opening, they have the choice of someone who's been working at McDonald's for 5 years at the cash register or whatever, and someone who has been unemployed for 2 years. And they're going to choose the person that probably has employment stability in another McDonald's. If it's Taco Bell, it's just how it works. And so it's how it works almost in every profession. You see all the time, there's articles like just almost every week. I've been reading articles in the Wall Street Journal and all these places of people that are long-term, been unemployed for a long time. And they may have been, I saw an article the other day of some woman that had been like a manager of a large tech company making, very good income. And she wasn't able to find another job, and she's been unemployed for a long time. And so people aren't interviewing her. Now she's, these people, it's just crazy. Like they're going to work in retail and things, and meaning they're helping sell clothes or whatever. I mean, in a store. So I mean, it's hard. And just keeping to remember that all law firms are, if they have an opening, they're going to have a large pool of candidates, and the largest firms will have a ton of candidates often. And and the people that are employed are more likely to get hired. So if you're competing with 10 people for the same job, you may have better experience than them, and that may get you in the door. But unemployment is, if the person that's unemployed is not going to look as good as the person that is employed. And so firms are going to prioritize the person that looks like they continually have access to work and is moving. And so that's the reason. It doesn't matter, like I said earlier, the quality of your credentials even doesn't matter. I've seen a lot of times, I had this happen with two people that ended up coming to work for me. Now, you're not going to like this story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. And it's kind of depressing. So this is, we're talking about maybe 15 and 23, 24 years ago. I had two people that came to me, and I used to, like, when I would see a candidate, I would just have like all this enthusiasm for them and do everything I could to get them a job. And I had one guy that had been at Columbia Law School, had never worked in a law firm during the summer, and then had graduated without a job. And when I saw his resume, he had been unemployed for 6 months. And then I had another guy that went to Berkeley. He was an amazing guy. I think he graduated from high school like 15 or something, and then got into Berkeley and then got into Harvard, but wanted to get away from his family. So he went to Berkeley. We got a full ride scholarship and everything. And he also had never worked any place during the summer. And so they came to me, and both of them had not gotten a job in 6 months and no law firms on their resume for these top law schools. And I tried to help them. I helped them they wanted to work in Los Angeles proper. So each one of them, I had them send 400 or 500 letters to all the law firms we could find in Los Angeles that potentially got hire them. Maybe it was a few more than that. And each of them didn't get any interviews and was just incredibly crushed, by what happened. And, and so this is what can happen, if you are unemployed for 6 months after graduating from law school, can hurt you. Attorneys not working will often not do well when they return to law firms. So law firms know this. So law firms will often, not interview them because of that, or hire them because they've had bad experience in the past. If they leave for management issues, they may clash with new firms too. And their low hours, they may have them because they struggle with work quality or their work ethic and all sorts of things. So I've told the story a lot, but when I was, when BCG, I used to I would find attorneys that had worked in really, had gone to really good law schools, and they had gotten jobs in really big firms, and they were unemployed. Because of that, I knew it would be difficult for them to get positions in law firms. So I would represent them and try to get them out to law firms and get them hired. But those attorneys would not get positions. They were just, because they were unemployed, people weren't touching them. Sometimes it might have been in a recession or something, but people just weren't touching them. And so I'd be like, well, maybe you can become a recruiter. Like, these are the benefits of working in a recruiting firm, and why it's good to work here and all these things. And so then I would have these people come over and be recruiters at BCG. And in almost every case, the people that had been at their firms for a year, 18 months or whatever, and I hired them, they came to the company and they were just extremely hard to manage. They had negative attitudes. They affected everybody at the company, and they ended up leaving, or I had to fire them, after a year or whatever it was, and they would start their own firms and compete with us. So that's just kind of, what happens a lot of times with people that aren't working. There may be some issues with them. And conversely, recruiters that I hired that have been at law firms for a long period of time and then decided to become recruiters, they ended up, doing very well here. So, and staying for a long period of time. So, sometimes people are fired for misconduct, and that can create a long-term issue with them where the people are afraid to hire them. And when they do, they they regret it. I had a guy that was a patent attorney in like Madison, Wisconsin, and he'd worked at another law firm that had this kind of gap on his resume. And I got him hired at a pretty good size, another good size firm in Madison. And then they hired him. He got there, and it's a small legal market, and the firm he'd worked at before, like somehow news got to the new firm that he'd done something negative or something, and so then the law firm that he was at fired him. It was very sad. And sometimes attorneys that lose their jobs also, when they go to new firms, they become paranoid. They start documenting everything that happened because they're worried they might get fired. They're angry at their previous employer for firing them, so they bring that anger to their new jobs. And it's just, this is something that law firms realize when they're trying to hire people. And people that are fired from law firms will often feel that they need to get back at the system and then quit jobs and fire the next employer. And so these people, this is just how law firms see them, become very risky hires. And a lot of firms have had very bad experiences with hiring unemployed attorneys. And it's not to say they haven't done in the past, but when they do, they've had bad experiences, so they're gun shy. And this is just something that HR people recognize, and all sorts of things. Partners that lose their job, are often considered unprofitable or last firm. Others may have been asked to leave by not have, because their productivity wasn't considered enough. Many times partners will leave because they come into law firms and they tell the new law firm that they have all this business, and then they get to the new law firm and the business doesn't materialize. And so there's partners that will bounce around between firms every 1 to 2 years. They'll get to the new firm and say they're going to bring in all this business, and they have all these clients, and the law firm has no way of checking if they really did have all these clients. And they'll say, oh, it's difficult to bring these clients over, I'm working on it. And so law firms will often have a lot of, be skeptical even of partners, and so that can happen. So they're cautious about that. There are attorneys that I encounter all the time. They will have substance abuse issues. They may have mental health issues. They may have family conflicts and things. And so, law firms will often, when they let these people go, they'll do it very quietly. They'll come to them and they'll be like, we're empathetic of these issues, but you can't, stick around. And, as I'm sure you're aware, attorneys, typically have, there's a much higher rate of substance abuse and depression and things in the legal, among attorneys and other things. And sometimes people will get to firms or be at firms when they have these issues, and they will, there'll be frequent unexplained absences, there'll be missed deadlines, there'll be all these excuses they'll say about their father, parents and stuff, or their spouse. And so a lot of times people will have these sort of psychological issues that make them leave other firms and then go to new firms. I've had people, that I placed that, they get there and, they're at the firm, and they're they literally, I had one guy that had a fan like blowing on his face in his office because he was, addicted to crystal meth or something. And another woman that I placed at the Los Angeles office of this, major New York law firm. And she'd been, before she went to law school, she'd been a model, and she'd been a cocaine addict, and had all these, serious problems, and then overcame them. And then, started an association or something to help people with these problems. And then had gotten into Harvard Law School and done very well there. So well that they asked her to stay an extra year and teach a class, which is kind of unheard of. But anyway, so she got to this firm, and all this stress and things came back, and she got addicted to crystal meth and literally like wound up on the street. Just absolutely incredible. So attorneys will have problems, will have substance abuse problems. I know one partner that I know very well, and he moves firms literally every couple of years. He gets to a firm and they realize that he's an alcoholic, and then there's all sorts of issues. sometimes people have health problems, and if you list you have health problems in your resume, or you tell people that, even though it's true, they're forced to choose between someone that doesn't have health problems and someone that does. And so, when you're looking for a job, or if you leave the job because of that, you should be in a position where the law firm, will bring you back. And so, there's attorneys all the time that have the misassignments and have alcohol and drug problems and things, or personal psychiatric demons and things that they're fighting, and all these sorts of things, alcoholism, family break, someone in the family, went through a downward spiral. There's all these sorts of things, and law firms really aren't that concerned about it. If you're hiring a doctor and you have some very serious health issue, and the doctor, breaks and you can't do surgery because they're sick or something. I mean, all the time. I mean, you have to look at things from the client's point of view. And so that, is important. And I see this, like I said, all the time. I have candidates that leave firms and things. I had one woman that was at a big law firm in Chicago, and she was German, and she wanted to go back to Germany. And she got to this firm in Germany, and they very quickly found out that she was an alcoholic. And, and she was missing, not coming into work and being drunk at work and things. And, so people are often, a little bit skeptical of that. If you're not employed and you're not getting work, you should always be doing whatever you can to network in the legal community. You need to get involved in associations. You need to network with people at the law firms. You need to do whatever you can to try to network with people, have people that you can hopefully rely on for work and jobs. And that's just something, if you should do the same thing, trying to get clients, but you need to be able to network. If you're at a really good firm and you're doing good work, I see this all the time too. The law firm will often help you get an in-house position. So people that do really well in big law firms, the law firm has to let them go for whatever reason. The partners that have clients will try to, help them get in-house, or they'll know people at smaller firms and they'll refer them to there. And so these, kind of connections in your existing law firm, you should have them if you're doing good work. And a lot of times, you'll wind up on your feet. I see this all the time, people that the law firm just has to let go and get some other jobs. I had my cousin was at Sherman and Sterling in Hong Kong, and whatever it was, 2008 or something, there was that suddenly they didn't have any work, and then he was, let go, and then he got a call from a partner that he did work for, and the partner set him up with a really good in-house job in Bermuda, where ended up becoming a general counsel of this company and has had a really good career. So someone set him up. And so people that have really good reputations, their people will try to help them in their existing firm get work. And if you're unable to do that, then that shows also that you may not have been able to develop, a strong network. And so you want to be able to have a network with people in your existing firm, people outside of your firm. I know people that get jobs all the time, like they may be in a case against another attorney, and they go to trial. The attorney that they were against thinks they're just like an excellent attorney and finds work for them to do at their firm. So you should always try to network. You have people that are helping you. Sometimes people will not be working just because they're unsure they want to practice law. They don't, it's not, and you may be like in that type of, position, because if you're unemployed for a long period of time or any length of time, the reason for that may be very simple and like a Freudian reason, like you're unsure you want to practice law. And it's very common in markets like New York and stuff for people to just get burned out, and they make excuses for not applying to jobs. They get into interviews and they're burnt out and they no longer have enthusiasm. I see people all the time that I get them positions and they're unemployed for whatever reason, and they get offers and then they decline them, saying they're not sure they want to practice law anymore. So a lot of times, you may not want to work because you may be unemployed, you may be not interested, and that's something that law firms, look at. A law firm may not be the right place for you, but you have to think about how the law firms are looking at things, and all these sorts of things. With lateral hires, a lot of times if someone's been unemployed for a long period of time, they will leave the firm very quickly. They'll just decide they don't want to do it anymore. or they'll get to the firm and they'll start looking for in-house positions. And law firms just want to feel that you're 100% committed, and they often will reach the conclusion that you may not be. And then the other point, and this is kind of the final point, and then we'll go to questions. But law firms have a lot of choices when hiring lateral people. So attorneys who are employed are, the presumption is they're more committed, they're higher performing, they're more likely to fit in. A law firm is their first choice, and they're going to avoid attorneys who appear problematical or uncommitted. They're high salaries, they're bringing people in to work on big firms on important matters, and they want to see someone that is likely to stay there for a long period of time. And again, in the largest legal markets, the best law firms will have a lot of applicants, and so why would they hire someone that seems risky? So, just kind of in conclusion, I wish it was easier for unemployed attorneys to get lateral positions. It is difficult, but again, you can get a job. I mean, there's always going to be someone that will hire you if you look at enough places. So it's not like it's impossible. It's just that you need to really, think about yourself and represent yourself like, it's the most important thing in the world. You should be looking for a job like full time, like 8 or 10 hours a day. You should be doing everything you possibly can if you're unemployed for whatever reason. And the more time if you're taking time off, law firms again are going to have the choice for people that are not taking time off and they don't know the reasons for that. Partners don't take, take 3 or 4 months off. They're continually working. You have to be continually employed throughout your career. That's the job of a lawyer. If you walk away, that's going to have ramifications. And your career in a law firm can last, 50 years. I mean, you can start in a law firm at the age of 25 and be working when you're 75, even in the same law firm if you do a good job. So lawyers are expected to always be getting work. They're expected to be employed. And when you're not, it doesn't mean you're not going to get a job, because someone will always have a use for you, and someone it doesn't mean it's the highest paid, but there may be markets where there's not enough attorneys and people will take a risk on you. But when you're unemployed, your odds of getting a position are like, 5 to 10 times worse than if you are employed. So it makes it much more difficult, which means you have to work much harder to get a job. Firms, want people that are already working at promote stability, commitment, reliability, and all of these things. So we'll take a quick break, and then when I come back, we'll do questions. I am leaving today. I mean, I have to catch a flight in about 3 hours, so I don't have a lot of time for questions. I will go through the questions and try to make sure that I answer each one in a way. I mean, some people will have questions that are related to other questions, and so I'll try to answer each one. And then if you do have questions this week that I don't get to, you can just, if you ask them next week, and write them down. Okay, so questions. Give me 1 second here. Like during this presentation a lot of times, because are doing this really good presentation, because it's not easy information to hear, especially if you're not employed. But the hope the most important thing that I hope you get out of this is that it's it's important. And if you're unemployed right now, it's important your next job to look employed. It's always important to have access to work. If your job does look like it's a risk, it's always a good idea to do whatever you possibly can to get to get another job, and so to stay employed. The first question: what specific? I'll make this a larger comment. What specific concerns should law firms be aware of for evaluating lateral candidates who are currently unemployed? Well, I think I covered most of those, but the major ones are going to be why are they unemployed? Like, is it because they want to be unemployed? Is it because they weren't getting work? Is it because there's difficulty managing them? Is it because that they just left and did quit for whatever reason? Are they going to do that again? People, like I said, that are unemployed are often problematical. There are things that they probably may have done wrong in their last position, and honestly, that's the case probably with 75% at least of the candidates that I encounter in my job. So if 75% of the candidates that I'm that have problems, a lot of times the new firm won't last there either, but they'll be able to convince people to hire them. Like the biggest thing is the risk. So what is the risk hiring someone that's unemployed compared to someone that is employed? There are people, and it's awesome when there are these people. There are people that will lose a job for whatever reason, or make mistakes, or have problems, and then will, go to their next position, will just have like all out enthusiasm, and they'll be like such a better version of themselves, and they'll improve. And that's, the best thing that can happen. And, people learn a lesson, then they become much more valuable to the next firm, and they don't quit, and they commit, and they work really hard, and they try to do better work on people. So that's one thing that can happen. I'll tell you something that happened to me very early in my career. I was working for a federal district judge, and early on I made some typos. One was really stupid. I almost let someone out of prison, and had some, made some mistakes. I was doing what's called a habeas corpus petition. This was when I've been there for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and we would always deny them. You write deny. And for whatever reason, I don't know what was going on with me psychologically, but just wasn't thinking, and I wrote granted on it. A guy called me in his office, and he's like, if you ever do this again, like, you're in huge trouble. And so I became, hyper vigilant about how the kind of work that I produced. And for him, it was like, you can't really necessarily, the logic that a judge uses to reach a decision, it's kind of, it's presumed to be the right logic. But so you can't always judge the quality of an attorney. The way you judge like a quality of attorney often is, if all this logic's happening in the background, then the work needs to be perfect, and it needs to be, proofed. And because if it's not, then it looks like there wasn't a lot of thought with it. So this is how he trained me. And I ended up losing my job with him because he was very Republican, and I disagreed with a lot of stuff that he said. He knew I wasn't on his side, so he did the right thing and got rid of me. I was gossiping with people in the courthouse and things. So that's kind of what happened with him. But at the same time, I got into, a new position. And when I started practicing law, I was hyper vigilant about making sure that things were proofed very well and doing the best work I could, being on the side of the people that hired me. So I learned lessons from that and became a better attorney. So, law firms can hire people that have made mistakes and have, had problems, and that person could come into the new law firm and be better than the people that are there that, didn't lose jobs. But the biggest concerns are, in most cases, when, a young attorney has lost a job or is unemployed, there's often something in the background. So people should be probing, and they should be probing very, very carefully. I remember I was looking for a job when I was thinking about working in another firm. It was the third firm that I was considering working at in 3 years. And I was just about to get an offer from this firm, and they called me to the office of the firm, and the recruiting coordinator put me in a room with her. She started bonding with me and asking me all these, questions, kind of personal questions and things, and being very, very nice to me. And then at one point, like when I had my guard down, she said, are you trying to find another job because they're asking you to? And so she was looking for that, because if I told her yes, I wouldn't have been hired. I ended up not getting hired by the firm. I don't know exactly what happened, but that's what happened. How do I prepare for judicial clerkship application as a practicing attorney? So if you're trying to get a judicial clerkship as a practicing attorney, that's not always the best career route. You can certainly go and get a clerkship. Federal district court clerkships are always good to have on your resume. There are studies that, you're more likely to be a partner in a law firm, and you're more likely to make more money and things that are doing a judicial clerkship. So judges that have judicial clerkships, you should basically, be interested in writing and enthusiastic about working for a judge. And then you apply to as many as you can. There are 600 or whatever federal district judges. There are Supreme Courts, the highest court in every state, and trial courts and appellate courts. So, my best piece of advice to anybody who wants to do judicial clerkship is just apply to as many places as possible. If it's a judicial clerkship, that clerkships are litigation. So, if you want to do a clerkship when you're a law student, your first job should be doing litigation, because that's what judges do. So the best way to prepare is by litigation, and then judges will hire often along political lines. So you have Democrats and Republicans. So if you're applying to a judge who's a Democrat, you should be putting things, related to a Democrat if you can on your resume. If you're Republican, same thing. and then, have litigation on your resume. Type of litigation you do is also important. So you would want to do commercial litigation as opposed to like personal injury or insurance defense. Commercial litigation is considered, a higher level of litigation because you're representing large companies and you can go a lot of detail. Whereas if you're doing personal injury, just filing complaints and things, it's just much different. So get into commercial litigation, apply to a lot of places, make your resume either politically neutral or politically one thing or the other for the type of judges you're applying to, and then apply to as many federal district judges as you can. There are also federal district judges that have openings throughout the year when a clerk leaves and stuff. So you can also apply to those. And sometimes those are only like 6 months, 6-month appointments as opposed to, you might not be there for a full year or something because that's all the clerkship is after someone pays. Okay, what are the career benefits of pursuing LLM as a mid-career attorney? So it depends on what the LLM's in. So if you're a tax attorney, you can go get an M in tax. That would be helpful. If you're a education attorney, there are LLMs in education law that can be helpful. If you're a healthcare attorney, you can get an LLM in healthcare law. They're helpful to the extent that they will give you more depth in your existing practice area. Sometimes people get LLMs because they want to go into another practice area. A lot of times people get LLMs because they want to have a more prestigious school on their resume. So, that I guess can help a little bit. But an LLM generally won't benefit you. It can benefit you, but it won't necessarily benefit you that much. And the reason is because an LLM is kind of an academic type thing. And everyone can get good grades doing it. And it's not like getting a JD where they can compare people in their class. And LLM is also a break in practicing law. So it has to be something that's very beneficial. I know a lot of people that went and get tax LLMs at NYU just because they wanted to have, they want to learn more. Sometimes they'll even do it mid-career and it can be useful. It's a good credential having an LLM from like NYU in tax or Georgetown. So people will do that, but some of the LLMs are just kind of a waste, like international relations and, other things. So you need to understand, is this LLM really going to advance my career, hopefully in my practice area? And in most cases, an LLM won't. LLMs are kind of profit centers for law schools. So, you can show up there and give them $100,000 and all they're doing is plugging you into letting you sit in, take exams in existing classes that they're teaching to the JD students. So, does the LLM degree advance my career in my practice area? It doesn't do that. And, the answer could be yes or no, but in most cases, the answer is going to be no. So just think about that there, especially when it's in things like international relations. I mean, I've seen people who get LLMs in IP law, which to me seems just like a complete waste of time because IP law, you typically need to be an engineer. And then, pass the patent bar and people get an LLM in intellectual property law, and it's just kind of a waste. I was talking to a woman actually on Saturday. I was doing a career counseling meeting, and this woman was getting an LLM in like mediation or something, or I don't know what it was, from Pepperdine, and had done worked in-house, worked in a law firm. There was just no focus to her resume. And people probably aren't going to hire someone that gets an LLM in mediation. I mean, what does that achieve? And I don't know, but I've actually encountered a couple of people that have done that. Now I think Pepperdine does have probably one of the best mediation LLMs. It may not be mediation, something related to that in the country, but how does that help you? I mean, if someone needs a mediator, oftentimes they'll hire someone that's been a judge or a partner in a major law firm. Those would be the people that mediate cases, not someone that just studied human relations, in the school. So, and I think that's a huge waste of time, and then it made her resume just all academic, like talking about the paper she'd written and the presentation she'd given, and yeah. Okay, next question. A lot of law firm questions. How can law firms adjust their hiring process to avoid missing out on lateral candidates who are not currently employed? Well, generally, if first of all, the people that are unemployed will always, apply for jobs, hopefully. How do you miss strong lateral candidates who are currently unemployed?
Well, one of the best ways to find the best candidates that are unemployed is to look at their employment stability at their last jobs. So if someone was at a firm for 5 years, well, that's a pretty good indication that the person did good work and the firm kept them around for that long. So I would say, when you're looking at lateral candidates, and this is, I guess, for people that are watching the webinar too, that are attorneys, the most important thing that they can have on their resume is stability, because that shows that they were probably doing good work and people were giving them work. So if you see someone with a lot of stability on their resume, like that can help. If you see someone that looks like they really want to be an attorney, like there's just stuff in their background that says that they really like what they're doing, and then they write up all their transactions and have a transaction sheet. Their resume talks about all the different things they've done in litigation or whatever it is. Then you find people that are very enthusiastic about the practice area that can be very helpful. And sometimes women will go have kids, or all sorts of things, and there's no reason to discriminate against them. They're just as valuable as people that didn't. So but how do you adjust your hiring processes for those candidates? The best thing to do is just look for a stability when you talk to them, their level of enthusiasm compared to people that are employed, the reasons that they're unemployed. I mean, people can be unemployed because, again, a firm lost all their business in a practice area. Sometimes partners will leave that had all the work and leave an associate sitting there. So you just ask a lot of questions and you figure things out. And if the person seems like it would be a better fit for your culture, then that can help as well. So you just kind of look at all these things and decide if the person, is a good fit for you. Okay, why does it matter if I take a job at graduation that isn't a law firm? How can I recover if I do? So if you choose a job that's not in a law firm, the presumption is that is the practice setting you want to be in, or a law firm job isn't important to you in the way it should be. So law firms want people that want to work in other law firms. And that choose that as a practice setting. So any attorney that's graduating from law school and taking the bar or whatever, you can get a job in a law firm if you look at enough law firms and you apply to enough places, and enough firms with different practice areas. There are firms that will hire people in workers' comp and all these different practice areas, regardless of the prestige of their school. But you typically want to apply to as many places as possible. Anytime an attorney chooses a job in another practice setting other than a law firm, their career in a law firm is hurt very, very severely. Like it becomes much more difficult for them to find jobs outside of law firms. Again, because the idea is that the person is working in a law firm is not as important to them. When you work in a law firm, you're working for paying clients, and the clients have certain expectations, and the work needs to be done in a certain way. If you're working in the government or in-house and things, no one knows like the type of work or the quality of work that's required. So it's very difficult to evaluate them. So how do you apply or recover? You just start applying to a lot of places and networking. If you apply to enough firms, there's always going to be someone that needs your work and will hire you. Let me just see if I can find it here. I'll try to. Oh, here we go. Okay, so I'm going to share a screen real quickly that I think is interesting. It can maybe help you. Okay, so this is just something that BCG sends to candidates when they come in, and it talks about how to uncover sort of a hidden job market. What we do when a candidate comes in is, we try to make sure that we cover the whole market for them with applications. So if you're looking for a job and you're just looking on job boards, you're really seeing a very small universe of the opportunities that are available. If you're doing the same thing with LinkedIn, that's happening. If you're using other recruiting firms, that's generally happening. So what BCG does, and we could do it much better than we are, is we develop large list of firms for people. So we go in and we look at what are the firms in the market that do the type of work that person does. And so we try to find those sorts of firms. And when we find those and we put them in their accounts, and we try to get people to allow us to apply to those firms. And if we develop like large list of firms and send people to a lot of places, they get interviews. And most of the candidates that allow us to do this do get interviews and do get placed, but a lot of candidates will just want to look at just firms that have existing jobs and so forth. And And that limits them because they're in competition with people that don't. So when someone works at BCG, like we will have jobs that are exclusive to us that we send them to. We will have jobs that are currently active that we send them to. And we have a lot of, we have a team of like 50 people researching them, so a lot more than LinkedIn or Indeed and anything. We have firms that have interviewed people similar to us in the past that may not have openings, firms that have had jobs that were exclusive with us before, firms that have had openings just in the past, like we go back 25 years, but we typically want some. And then we do, blind submissions, which are, we put together a list of firms in our practice area and we'll send them out to those firms. And so, if you are someone who's working with us and they're only approving active jobs, then their odds of getting placed are very low in terms of getting interviews because they're competing with everyone else that's applying for those jobs, unless it's an exclusive job. But if they allow us to, send them to all the different firms and stuff that we can find in their practice area, in the database, in our database, then we're finding places that traditionally will have work for them that they may not be applying to on their own. So this is kind of how, this works. It's kind of how things helps. Let me just see if this is the actual thing that I wanted to show you. This may not be BCG total market. See, I'll find another link for you just because I want to show you kind of how this works with candidates. Let me just see here if I can pull this up. I'm looking for another URL there. So I may not have it. So if I don't. No. Oh, here we go. I found it. And this is a very important example that I want to show you. And this could, if you understand what I'm talking about, it could really change the direction of your career. So let's see here. So this talks about the market coverage. But one of the most important things about this is to understand, like, why would a firm hire me if they don't have a job? If a firm has $1,400 worth of work and you're doing that, you're working at $400 an hour, and they have this work that you could be doing, or they could have someone do there that's not getting done for whatever reason, or they think they can get more work out of their clients, then if they can give you just 1,400 hours worth of work per year and pay you $200,000, they're going to be generating $560,000 from your work. So you are making them $350,000, which is awesome. So, and it gets even better. Like if your billing rate's higher, if it's 1,600 hours to $500 an hour, then that's, 800,000. Maybe they pay you 150, or maybe they pay you 230, whatever. But you can see here that 2,000 hours, it's $1 million a year. So this is why law firms hire people when they don't have openings. And this is why you need to reach out to as many places as you possibly can. You need to really go all out when you're searching for a job, not just applying to jobs, but also applying to places that potentially could use you, even if they don't have jobs, because this is just how the market works, and people are going to hire you, if they have the work. So you need to try to do everything you can to get a job in a law firm. If you're, unemployed, you just have to go all out, apply to places that don't have jobs. It's the best way to get a job. There's absolutely no better way. I say this from 25 years of experience. I've worked with having a deep understanding of the market and how things work. That's what you need to do. Okay, what are the most effective ways to develop a book of business as a mid-level associate? So if you want to develop business as mid-level associate, it's obviously going to be a lot easier to generate business when you have a partner title. If you're at a huge law firm, it's going to be very difficult to bring in clients that are large enough and pay the billing rates that the large law firm needs. So your job as a mid-level associate means you have to start doing whatever you can to lay the seeds to get work in the future. So what do mid-level associates do that develop books of business that they can have later in their career? They do a very good job for the companies and things that they're working for, and they try to have good relationships with them because maybe those companies will hire them at another firm. They try to go out and meet with people and to talk to them. If they're a corporate attorney, talk to them about their business and don't offer for them to hire them, just offer advice and things. This is something that a guy that became a huge book of business I know did as a mid-level associate. They go to events where they can network with people. They become experts in some certain aspect of whatever they're doing, and they write papers, and they get out there in the community. They join associations.
all these sorts of things. And if you want to develop a mid-level associate, you want to start doing that, you need to realize that your future is going to be based on what you can do with all this stuff. So you start developing contacts and things. Some attorneys will even different law firm, different, like the LA District Court or LA Court, Superior Court will every day will publish a list of the law firm, lawsuits and things that were filed. And then they will take the, they will call people that are sued and they will offer them advice, and they will not necessarily even say to hire me. They'll just provide a lot of value. So they get out there and they start networking with people and just do everything that they can. If they know general counsels at a firm, and then they know another in-house attorney that lost their job, they may try to tell the person about this other person working in-house that needs a job, or they'll just do all these sorts of things, and they'll develop goodwill among people. And they typically will go out and they will do things for people without necessarily expecting something in return, and help people, give advice, be part of associations, contribute to the legal community by writing and talking and developing an expertise in something, and then be seen as a really good solution for the problems that people have. And they spend just as much time, a lot of time, developing work and business as they would working. So if you work 2,000 hours a year, they'll have 1,000 hours or whatever to start doing it. And this stuff's important. If you want to have a long-term career in a law firm, being able to do that, with, potential clients and stuff, and develop a network is important. So that's how people do it. It's easier said than done. But one of the examples I like to give a lot of times is, if you want to meet a significant other, well, you figure it out. You go on dating sites, or you go to clubs and bars and things to meet people. You talk to a lot of people. You just put yourself out there, and people see you and you meet people. So there's this guy that has works or lives in one of my rental properties, and he's single, and he just likes to meet all these different women. So he goes out to bars and things every single night. His motto, and he meets a lot of women. I'm not saying I approve of any of this, but he's like, well, you got to swing a lot of times to hit a home run. So he doesn't care. He just keeps meeting people, and eventually something hits for him. So, this is the way that a lot of people think about stuff. And you should think about business the same way. If you meet enough people, someone's going to give you work. How do I handle a toxic work environment at my law firm without derailing my career? So if it's a toxic work environment and you can't handle it, then you should look for another job. Sometimes the environment will be toxic just with the certain people you're working for. So you try to find people to work with that aren't toxic, and get away from working with people that are toxic. If it is toxic, then you need to, you shouldn't get involved in rumors and people that are talking negatively about the firm. You should be doing whatever you can to isolate yourself from it. So every law firm is toxic. There will be people that are against the law firm and toxic, and there will be people that are for the law firm, and there will be people that are just neutral and don't get involved. So if things are toxic, you don't want to get involved. You don't want to be talking to other associates about how toxic it is. You don't want to be, going into different offices and closing your door and talking about it. You don't want to be spending time associating with people that are the most unhappy at the firm. You just do whatever you can to avoid that toxic work environment, and you'll be fine. But this is kind of, what people do. Every law firm can be toxic. So you just need to not be on the side of people that are toxic, because if you are, then the law firm will work, will see you as part of the problem, and they will often lose your job. How do I position myself in law school to avoid gaps and make me unemployable later? Well, the most important thing as a law student is just to get summer jobs in law firms. So you're going to be more employable if you're able to get a summer job in a law firm, even if it's unpaid. So having a law firm on your resume during the summer is the most important thing. Some law firm will hire you. Law firms have, different, law firms will hire you even if you want to work for free. There are law firms all over the country. In every city, there's tons of law firms. And if someone gets an unsolicited application from someone that wants to work there in the summer, and the person will do it at a low cost, they're going to be excited about it. You would too. So I used to hire from Pepperdine. I used to have a law firm in Malibu that handled all the work that the company had, whether it's, filing corporate documents or litigations and things. And those, I always was able to
hire people would apply to do work in the summer. I would just post things in Pepperdine Career Center and get people to do work. So you can always work, for minimum wage or whatever. You can always find a job. Okay, let's see here. Next question. And there's only one more question, and we'll take next question because I got it verified at 12:30. Okay, how do I navigate as an attorney with a disability in a competitive law firm? So people can have disabilities in law firms. It's not, something that will prevent you from having a long-term career in a law firm. So if you have a disability, most of the time, the law firm will give you accommodations. Most law firms, the human resources department is overwhelmingly liberal. I don't mean that in a negative way, but they believe in giving people, they believe in giving people a chance. And I think, when you have a disability, you need to be as productive as you can with your skills and work around it. And law firms do want to take care of people that have disabilities. They want to reflect what society is. So they try to hire people from different ethnic backgrounds and religions many times, and mainly the large law firms, but they try to do that. And so, having a disability is something that you shouldn't, you should do what you can to not make an issue out of it. And people will respect you, if you're doing your best. And so that's, I guess, my main piece of advice. I've had candidates that were blind and were able to get jobs. People have respect for people with disabilities that are trying hard, but it can be harder to get a job. I'm not lying to you, and it can be harder to stay in certain types of law firms. So, my advice would be to go to a place that accommodates you and where you're comfortable, where the work is something, the hours are what you can do and all that sort of thing, and you're happy. That would be very exclusive advice. Next question. What are the best ways to transition from a corporate law job to a public interest career? So if you're currently a corporate attorney and you want to do public interest, then, and that's actually kind of rare. Most people don't do that, but you just need to apply to as many public interest places as you can. Preferably your resume will say something about your interest in that particular. If it's about the environment, then maybe your environmental law journal or whatever, and you like environmental law, or you worked in an environmental company prior to law school. But people that public interest employers, which by the way, pay very, very little. They want to hire people that have passion, whatever the subject matter is that they're doing. Most of the time, public interest jobs are going to require litigation skills, but certainly if someone's passionate enough about an issue, then they will want to hire you. That's just how it works. There are public interest, groups for Republicans and Democrats and for whatever. There's just tons of them. So, if you apply to a public interest job, you're not going to be able to get back in the law firm in most cases, but you just apply to enough places and you have a passion for something and you're likely to get a job. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being on the webinar. I apologize for not getting to all the questions, but if you do save your questions, ask them next week. I will also try to get a list of the questions and copy them in the next few minutes so I can address them. Again, this was kind of a depressing webinar in a lot of respects, but it's actually should be encouraging to you. It should show you what you need to do regardless of the status, the stage of your career, to make it easier for you to get a job. And that's really all I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about you having a long-term career, because you can, again, work in a law firm for 50 plus years after graduating from law school. I don't want you to make mistakes. If you've made mistakes already, you should do your best to overcome them by having some level of employment stability. Remember, you always have to have access to work. That's the most important thing for an attorney. So that should be something like you write down and you look at every day. I must have access to work. I must have access to work. And that means, as an associate, having people give you work, being in a firm where there is work, doing the work well that you're given so you get repeat work, and then hopefully eventually developing a book of business where you're always going to have access to work. And that's the job of an attorney, is always to have access to work. And then it's to create work. Like you find work from the extra work that could be done on assignments, and you pitch that to partners that are giving you work. You have a client, you tell them there's all these things that they should be doing to protect their company or to prevent them from being sued. Employment attorneys will go into companies all the time and they'll do presentations of things and consult with HR and management. There's just all these things you can do, but you need to be able to always generate work and you always need to have access to work. And if you remember that, you're going to be in a good shape. And then just remember that, if you're unemployed, you need to go all out looking for jobs, and anybody can get a job if you look at enough places. There's hundreds of municipalities and things in almost every state. And each of those municipalities, they have over 20,000 people, and there's going to be a lot of attorneys, and there's a lot of places that will hire you, a lot of people that will hire you even if there's no work. And so there's hope. I mean, it's a matter of fact, there's not even hope. Anybody can get a job. You just have to really approach this from a very aggressive, standpoint to just expose yourself to the whole market. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of your week. And this particular webinar, I hope you learned a lot. It can save your career and put you on a really good path to succeed, which is my goal. Thanks again.